Wish you all a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. This year will likely be the seventh straight year of a positive return on the Nifty, that is the calendar year. Well, in these 7 years, we have seen a lot of things. We have seen demonetization, we have seen COVID, we have seen war, but still the markets are up on each of the calendar years. Does that mean that the markets don't care about anything and they just go up? Is this froth? Well, no. What it means is markets has gone up even with these factors. Why? That's because corporate earnings are there. That's because the GDP has grown. So are we saying that these things don't matter at all? Things like war, things like geopolitical issues, things like COVID, things like GST? Well, they all matter. They all matter, but they all matter in the short term. In the long term, markets are dependent on two very big factors, which are earnings and valuations. All of these things that I have talked about are things that go into making earnings and eventually valuations. So what's happened? The macro, which is the global macro and the domestic macro, they feed into corporate earnings. And corporate earnings is the cornerstone or the backbone for the markets. With the lead or lag, the markets will follow earnings. But how do earnings come? They come from a host of factors, out of which the global and domestic macro plays its part. Currently, as things stand, there is some deterioration on the horizon on global macro as well as domestic macro. We have seen that the Indian forex reserves have depleted by about $100 billion. That doesn't mean that it is a real bad thing and that we cannot handle it. What it means is, at the margin, the kind of cushion that we had for the macro and the micro translating into earnings is starting to deteriorate. Well, the forex reserves are down, the currency is down, the interest rates are up. Now, when interest rates are up, they tend to impact earnings with a lag. Simply because when interest rate goes up, corporate earnings will go down because the interest cost goes up. At the same time, the consumer wallet shrinks because if he pays interest, say EMI, on car, home loans, on credit cards, on personal loans, all of those things, his wallet also shrinks. If the consumer wallet shrinks, he spends less. If he spends less, the corporate earnings are going to be lesser. That's effectively the game here. But again, markets, as we say, will follow earnings in the long run. So what do we believe is the future of earnings? We believe even with the macro deteriorating at the margin across the world and in India, it will still translate into mid-teens growth in the future on corporate earnings. Even though valuations which are today historically higher than the standard deviations that you would want to look at, it does not mean that the markets have to go down drastically. Historically, markets can fall 10% anytime. They tend to fall 20% every 2 to 3 years, and they tend to fall 40 to 50% once in a decade. That does not mean that the history has to repeat itself. What it means is market tends to take all of these issues like COVID, demon, GST, war into its stride in the long term, and the GDP tends to grow, and so does corporate earnings. And when corporate earnings grow, markets follow. So in the long term, Indian story still remains very, very good. However, in the short term, for people who want to play trades, can always look at better opportunities to get into the market. That opportunities is provided by the macro, and that feeds into the micro. Today, the macro at the margin has deteriorated, but the Indian micro situation is very, very good. Earlier, we started with China plus one. Now, it's become Europe plus one as well. So we believe for the next 5 to 10 years, India can become a great manufacturing destination. From industries like chemicals, to capex, to cap goods, and some of the other manufacturing industries, we are very bullish over medium to long term. So, markets, as we head into the year end, are likely to give a seventh year of positive return. We should be happy with that. At the same time, for short term investors, they can look for some pullback, but for long term investors, just keep in mind that the markets are a slave to earnings. Earnings are likely to come, even with some small hiccups around the corner. As they come, markets will tend to go up. Keep investing. Thank you.